Vice Chair of Planning, Development and Heritage. I'd love to welcome everybody here. It's great to see such a great crowd here tonight. And it just shows that the interest is there for the town of Stratford. This meeting will be live broadcast streamed through the town of Stratford's YouTube and Facebook tonight. So hi to all the audience out there that are sitting back in their lazy boy chairs perhaps and watching, but whatever. So welcome also to you. And if you want to comment formally on anything from tonight's meeting, the town will accept written responses provided directly to the planning department by email or in writing until noon on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. So that's written and email. Have it in by Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. And please note that comments provided on any social media platform are not captured as part of the written submission process. Now, questions this evening will be monitored and submitted to be read into the record, and answers. To ask a question, please use the comment field on either YouTube or Facebook where you are viewing and live streamed. As this is a public meeting, you are required to provide your name and address when asking a question. All questions will be asked once the presentations are over. So I'll ask you to come to the mic, say your name and address, and proceed with your question. So now I'd like to introduce Kevin Reynolds, Director of Planning, Development and Heritage, to read in the application for tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight we're here to read an application that's been received from Concord Property Limited, the Grey Group, for amendments to the Town of Stratford Official Plan and the Zoning and Development Bylaw number 45. The proposed requires changes in land use designation and zoning. The official plan amendments will include policy changes and aforementioned land use designations, while the zoning bylaw amendments will include proposed changes to maximum building heights and other provisions for 2 new zones, an urban core zone and a core mixed use zone, each with a proposed set of development standards. Pursuant to Section 3 of the Zoning and Development Bylaw, it is required that a public meeting be held to solicit public input from residents on the proposed bylaw and official plan amendments. Prior to this meeting, 281 notification letters were sent out to residents within 150 meters of the subject property on November 3rd, 2022. 9 rezoning signs were placed around the core of the town on lands proposed for rezoning on November 10th. A Guardian ad was published in the newspaper on November 9th and again on November 19th, 2022. The media ad was also shared on the town's website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and in our e-news, our weekly e-news.
Thank you, Kevin. At this time, I'd like to call on Corey Gray. Corey is the CEO and Chairman of the board.
Good evening. So my name is Corey Gray. I'm an owner and the CEO of the Grey Group. Between Trevor McLeod, who's the Grey Group's president, and some other guests we have, they're going to be presenting all of the information tonight, discussing why this is a terrific project and a great development for Stratford's urban core. My job tonight is simply to say welcome and thank you for taking interest in our development and the future of Stratford. My family's had a history of building businesses with a strong emphasis on community, our team members, and with a commitment to quality and sustainability. These values truly are a focus of the Grey Group. This next video captures the vision we have for the future of Stratford. Thank you. My family moved to Stratford when I was about 10 years old, and I fell in love with it. We love the community, we love the people. It's just a wonderful place to live. I think Stratford has a great combination, a bit of a rural feel, but it has, you know, almost everything we need. We purchased the land in 2018. We knew that there was great potential for that land, but as we talked with the town about, you know, their vision and saw how it worked with ours, we knew that it was the perfect project.
The crossroads kind of represents the next generation of what Stratford can become. We're at a crossroads in time. It's really what's meant to happen in an urban core. You have the development so you don't have to expand the borders of the town. We develop up instead of out. It's much more economically feasible, it's much more environmentally sensitive, and much more sustainable. We've dealt with the Provincial Department of Transportation. We've engaged traffic study engineers. We've engaged economic impact studies. It's an extremely large development. It's probably, if not one of, the largest planned urban development in the history of PEI. Our overall plan right now has plans for in excess of 2,600 residential units, approximately 260,000 square feet of commercial space, and another 45,000 square feet of light industrial space. The crossroads can be really a shining example of what good development can be when three levels of government, private industry, and residents work together towards a common goal. It's a plan that we can be proud of, and that I hope the community will be proud of as well.
I plan to live in Stratford for the rest of my life. Trevor, our president, lives in Stratford. My dad, who was really the founder of the company, lives in Stratford. We are confident that it is the best way to move forward. You know, it will reduce urban sprawl, and we're confident that it will meet the needs of the residents.
We saw it as an opportunity to come up with something special, to come up with a big picture. We're very excited about the crossroads. We think it's a game changer for the town of Stratford. We're just looking forward to the ride.
So that, in a nutshell, is what we envision the crossroads becoming. First of all, before I get into anything else, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and you know, having input in the proposed development that we're looking at. I want to thank planning staff for facilitating this meeting, and I'd like to thank the mayor, deputy mayor, and all the incoming and outgoing councillors. We also have in attendance Rob LeBlanc and Roger Boychuk from Fathom Studios. We have a couple members of the Provincial Transportation Department, and we have a couple members I see in the audience here from CBCL, some of the professional engineers that we've engaged for this development. So who we are as a company, we started as a division of Vogue Optical, probably 30, 40 years ago now. I'm in my 27th year with the company at this point. So when we started, we bought locations to serve as locations for the stores, the Vogue Optical stores. And as we expanded the Vogue Optical chain, we bought more properties and expanded into larger properties and properties that didn't really have any relationship to Vogue Optical. Vogue sold back in late of 2013, and we retained all of that real estate at that time. And since then, we've added more and more properties throughout Atlantic Canada, and we've been expanding ever since. About 25% of that portfolio is on PEI. The remaining 75% is outside of PEI, but we want to do more investment in PEI. So that is where we basically got to the point where we purchased the Kelmac property. We saw it as a very unique opportunity. It's very rare that such a large parcel of land, undeveloped land, is in the center of a town. So a town that grew around a core area, and it was greenfield space. It doesn't need to be, demolished and done over. So when we purchased that in 2018, the first thing that we did was review the existing core plan that was done back in 2007, and that was done by a company called Acoustics, who turned into Fathom. So he's very familiar with what this community looks like and where it has come from. So then we engaged our professionals. Very first thing we did was engage CBCL and did a wetland delineation to identify any environmentally sensitive areas within the town. So that identified 3 areas that were of primary concern to us, and we tasked Rob at Fathom Studios to come up with a development plan, keeping that in mind and preserving those. We went back and forth with the town on several occasions, modifying that plan, taking their input, revising it until we came up with I believe it was a 4th iteration of that plan that we were happy with and we felt that they were happy with. Then we engaged Roger Boychuk to do a traffic study to ensure that the existing traffic infrastructure and the new traffic infrastructure that we were creating could be handled, so that they weren't over capacity, that everything would flow smoothly. So that was done. The next thing we did was engage Group ATN. I'll probably put that up there. Group ATN, which did an economic impact study, which really revealed to us, based on our investment, the economic spin-offs on construction dollars, on tax dollars, and everything else that was going to provide income and expense to the town and us. And finally, in speaking with the town, what we wanted to do was identify the existing commercial infrastructure to make sure that when we developed that property, we were developing the proper amount of space for commercial. And I know that the town had a very high concern with making sure that commercial space was readily available. And we've done that, and that study has kind of proven that we are going to be providing more than adequate commercial space. So where are we today? You've seen our overall vision of what the plan looks like. Some of the things that have happened since we've purchased that land is we've connected some dead ends that have always meant to be connected. So there's the McKinnon Drive, Glen Stewart, Marion Drive roundabout that connects all those areas. There's a new roundabout on the Trans-Canada Highway that the province has recently installed. As part of that, they've also installed almost 3.5 kilometers worth of paved active transportation routes. And as we go further with our development, we'll be connecting other dead ends and intersections that need further expansion, be it Jubilee, be it a stub that's coming off the new roundabout that will connect to Shakespeare, and connection to the Mason Road and the future community campus. Overall, our build-out is going to be proposed to be in excess of 2,600 residential units. And that would be a mix of single-family, duplex, townhomes, and apartment buildings. We would have over 300,000 square feet of commercial space. And again, that's a mix of retail, office, and light industrial. In today's construction dollars, that equates to over $1 billion in investment, which I'm sure you can agree is quite significant. Some of the highlights, our development on full build-out, we will be required to build 2.9 kilometers worth of new roadways. And to put that in perspective, if we were going to be building single-family homes to accommodate the same number of residents, we would have to build 22.7 kilometers worth of roadways. So, as you can well imagine, the additional 20 kilometers worth of roadways, water and sewer infrastructure, that would be a cost borne by us originally, but then that gets passed to the province and get passed to the city, and they're responsible for the maintenance on that. So the costs associated with maintaining roadways, snow removal, making sure your water sewer infrastructure is adequate and working properly is considerable. So that's stuff that doesn't have to be done with the density that we're proposing. From an environmental standpoint, it's estimated that that will save about 73,000 kilometers in vehicular traffic, in vehicular kilometers every year that will be saved. So essentially, this is just a flyover of what that looks like. I'm going to pass it off to Rob, and he can explain more about the language around the zoning and what that means.
Well, it's a packed house tonight. It's great to be back. I've been here a lot of times over the last 15 years, and I'm really excited tonight to be able to kind of walk you through what I think is the culmination of 15 years of working with the town to develop an urban core plan. And to do that tonight, I'm going to take you through, give you some background information on the properties that are being proposed. I'll take you through the plan itself, very high level. We are on a time constraint here tonight, but we're trying to leave enough time at the end for lots of questions. And I'll talk a little bit about the proposed zoning and the changes that are proposed, and I'm going to hand it over to Roger at the end to talk about the summary of the traffic impacts. So just to kind of orient you, here's Town Hall here now, the Trans-Canada Highway. The Sobeys property, Glen Stewart Drive, just to orient you. So this is about 102 acres of land, and it's made up of various PIDs and a wide range of different existing zones. There are familiar faces in the room here tonight, but really this plan started back in 2007 when our company, then was called Ekistics, worked on a core area vision. And the core area vision focused on a plan for the waterfront and its future development. But its main focus was the area around Town Hall and the town center. And it was to create a long-term kind of 20-year vision for the plan. And here we are, roughly 15 years later, starting to see the implementation of that. I should also say up in the top right-hand corner that Urban Strategies out of Toronto was hired probably 5 years prior to us to look at a similar strategy of how this urban core would build out. And so this has been a plan that's been a long time in the making. And part of that plan, here's Town Hall here, here's Trans-Canada Highway, proposal for a new intersection and connection to Town Hall, lots of new mixed-use development, lots of new residential development, different scales, so R1 housing and townhomes and semis, and some open space preservation. You'll notice even in the early plans, preserving the existing wetlands and looking at stormwater management as part of the overall strategy. And back in 2018, 2019, when we were commissioned, one of the first things we did was look at, based on the then available data for growth, Stratford was one of the fastest growing communities in Canada, with a growth rate of somewhere around 2.64% per year. And so we looked at projecting that out over the next 20 years to see where we would land with population. And really looking at the 2016 around 9,700 people. In 20 years, we'd almost double the population. We needed to find a way to accommodate that growth. So as an environmental planner, there's a number of ways to do that. We can continue to grow out with suburban sprawl. And as Trevor mentioned, the more low density that we have, the more land that we consume, the longer the roads get, the more driving that you have to do in order to do that. So in terms of environmental sustainability, growing up is much more sustainable than growing out. And so that's the plan that we move forward with. So we created a plan that started by looking at open space and infrastructure and environmental conservation areas. So we started with the blue areas that are the wetlands to preserve those areas, but really to make those the backbone of an open space network that would be part of this. We looked at adding active transportation, so bicycle routes on the south side of the highway and linking those bicycle routes into the development. And then of course, looking at the different land uses in here, making sure that there was the ground floor, all of the uses that the community would need would be located within this urban core. And so if I need milk or a haircut or any of the things that I need for daily living, I don't necessarily have to jump into a car and drive a long distance to get it. I can jump on my bike or I can walk to get most of my needs of the day. And so part of that plan was to look at a new urban core. It was the denser version of the two zones that I'm going to walk you through tonight, but it was close to Town Hall and the open space that surrounds it, some of the density that's already there today, and of course the future community campus connection. And then the other parcels we looked at that are currently zoned, there's 3 or 4 other different kind of mixed commercial zones and residential zones, would be a lower density zoning. And so I'm going to walk you through each of those. And the last piece of this plan was taking Jubilee, connecting it to Mason Road. So all of these dead-end roads that currently are found in the community, reconnecting those to make the connectivity to the new urban core much better than it is today. And as part of that plan, we looked at just a quick 3D visualization. This plan is somewhat dated in that we have taller buildings on the south side, and the zoning that I'm going to present tonight is really about capping the height on the south side of the development. Most of the height happens in this new urban core area, and then it steps down in height and density right down to R1 as we move to the north of the property. This is a fairly complicated rezoning exercise, and I'm glad to see so many people out tonight. It really is, what we're proposing is some changes to what's currently zoned C1 and C2. There's some TCMU, there's some TCR zone, there's some TCC. So there's these 5 different zones. Some of them already allow for residential development in the range of 30 units per acre. But the current zoning is what we call Euclidean zoning. It's very two-dimensional, old-style zoning. And what we're doing is we're moving to a more three-dimensional zoning. It's called form-based codes. And so what we're trying to do is shape the form and articulation of new buildings, make sure that we're preserving open space and amenity space as part of all of these buildings, and of course making sure that trails and active transportation and future transit connections all connect to this as well. And so what you'll see here in these little blue colors are we're changing some of the zones to this new mixed-use core zone. And these red zones that you find right in the middle is this new urban core zone. And so there's 11 proposed changes in zoning, but there are also some pieces that we're leaving the existing zoning. So for instance, up along the north side, the existing R1 zoning is being preserved. Some of the TCMU zoning is also being preserved as is today. Some of the TCC zoning is also being preserved. So to look at creating this new form-based coding, we had to create 2 new zones. And form-based coding started in the US probably 15, 20 years ago, and it's really started to gain momentum in Atlantic Canada somewhere around 2011. Halifax changed their downtown land use bylaws to create, to employ this new form-based coding, to look at the three-dimensional form of buildings and the massings and how to get the architecture right. And so as part of these 2 new zones, I won't get into the details of it, but really we've got the CMU, the core mixed use area, which happens around the fringes, and then we have this new urban core zone in the middle. And so if we look at the core mixed use zone, this is some of the building kind of archetypes that you might expect in a zone like this. There's, as you abut existing residential neighborhoods, the height is maxed out at 4 stories, but as you move away where you're backing on other zones, the maximum height is 6 stories. What you'll also see in these plans is we've got a 3 or 4 story street wall, and then there's step backs, and the step back is designed to reduce the shading impacts, to take the wind impacts that hit that building. It hits the podium of that upper story, and it makes for very comfortable walking on the street. And what it also does is for people walking on the street is you don't see that extra 2 stories of height above. So it feels like a 3 or 4 story building. There's also, as part of the form-based codes, there's articulation guidelines for architecture. There's material standards to make sure that very high-quality buildings are built. There's standards for ground floor units so that they're more like townhomes. They actually have entrances out, and they've got patio spaces out on the street. So this would vary from what the current zones would allow today, which would be kind of one single building sitting encircled by a parking lot, for instance. You'd come in one door and you'd go into a shared corridor in a building. Not a whole lot of standards for architecture. This really starts to create a new dynamic for that the developers have to follow for building articulation for materials and for the way projects are built. So that's the core mixed-use zone. The urban core zone is really characterized by requiring more open space. So that means that a lot of the parking has to go underground to create more open space, and that has stormwater management impacts and parks and recreation impacts. And there's 3 types of layers to the building. We've got a low-rise form, which is a 3-story street wall, and then there's a step back. And then there's another 4 or 5 stories of low, mid-rise and tall mid-rise portion. And then anything over 8 stories is the high-rise portion. And the high-rise portion, the tower is, in our case, we're proposing it be limited to 900 square meters in area. So you get a point tower form. And again, that's to reduce wind impacts, it's to reduce shading impacts, and to create much better architectural forms. So that's some of what some of these buildings could look like. We're proposing a height up to 12 stories high, and this is what something might look like in the mid-rise form. So you'd have somewhere in the 6 to 8 story range. And this is all codified in this new zone standard. So just a couple of views. We're kind of hanging from the south side looking north. Here's Town Hall. Here's that giant wetland that exists today. There's another wetland that's across on the Trans-Canada Highway that's being preserved. There'd be trail networks all the way around there, possibly a bridge. We've got our active transportation network that runs along the highway and into the development. We're terminating some of these dead-end roads, actually come in to possibly smaller urban roundabouts, which are great for bikes and walkers. And what you'll also notice in these things is that the parking, if there is surface parking, has to happen in behind the buildings. So that provides a buffer layer between, so we don't have these buildings right on backing onto residential neighborhoods. And we've got a standard that requires trees to be maintained if you're backing on any existing R1 lots for up to 6 meters wide. And of course, you're also in this plan, you're not allowed to park between the building and the street. So it doesn't feel like a strip mall, it doesn't feel like a traditional building surrounded by parking lots. And our urban core up in the north side. And so if we just swing around looking at the urban core, it's a mix of low-rise, mid-rise, and small portions of taller high-rise, capped at 12 stories. Our trail system, again, linking through the roundabout, which was imagined as part of this plan, which is built today, which is wonderful. And this is the TCMU current zoning that would see this as a larger format shopping mall under the current zoning today. I'm going to pass it over to Roger. He's going to walk through. Roger is a traffic engineer who works in our office.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this tonight. As with any big plan like this, for us, these are really fun ones to work on because you have really meaningful change going forward. I also recognize these are usually some of the most controversial pieces. This is usually where I get things thrown at me and whatnot. So feel free if you could refrain from throwing things. But certainly happy to answer questions. I'm going to try and keep this relatively short and hit on the big things. It's a 187-page report all in. I'm not going to go through every page. I'll try and hit the highlights, and like I say, as we go forward, get into any more questions about specifics that you might have. As part of these studies, the province, the town always request a traffic impact study, or what we like to call transportation impact study, because we really, cars and trucks are great, but we have transit, we have active transportation, we have transportation demand. There's a lot of pieces to the transportation network that have to work together. This all starts with us to say what's happening to the best of our ability to find what's happening today on the road network, and then we layer on top of that what's reasonably expected in the future. So we did a whole bunch of traffic counts, built a whole bunch of traffic models that represent today's conditions, calibrate that to today's conditions to make sure what we're seeing in our models represent what's actually happening on the streets. And then we take estimates. There's really two pieces that we layer on. One is, if this development were never to happen, don't build anything here, there's still going to be natural traffic growth. Stratford's a busy, growing place. There's going to be a natural level of traffic growth. And then there's going to be specific development. In this case, this is a large development that's going to generate a significant number of trips, no question about that. And this is really, when you look at traffic growth over time, this is going to be one of the big drivers of traffic growth in this area. So we kind of put those all together to say, what's the future conditions going to look like on the roadway? We do all these crazy trip generation tables based on industry standard methods that give us an indication of what this type of development is going to generate, both in terms of somebody getting up in the morning in an apartment and getting into their car, driving into Charlottetown, or maybe they're driving to the east, or maybe they're going to some of the local businesses or local commercial areas that get established within this urban core area. So one of the beauties of this is it's not 2,600 units generating traffic that travels out. A lot of this is people now walking from their apartment down the street. They grab a coffee at a commercial spot, maybe grab lunch at a local Tim Hortons or a Wendy's or something like that, and then walk over to their office space. So there's certainly opportunities here to capture those trips internally. And yes, absolutely, some people will be traveling from this area out. Some people will be traveling from outer areas here. So we make estimations of all that. We do all our trip distribution to understand when you say, if anybody freaked out and you say 2,600 units, you go, oh my goodness, that's a lot. Recognize that, one, that's trips that come in and leave. There's a lot of people, especially today now, that are starting to work from home more. There's all kinds of interesting work arrangements that are starting to help these traffic challenges that are coming along. This traffic distributes itself over a wide portion of the day and in a whole bunch of directions. When Rob and we talk about connections to different streets, it becomes a very strategic side of how we get this traffic in and out of here. It's not like we're going to drive everything through one intersection, but this traffic gets distributed. And that's a bit of a mix and match between how the subdivision gets planned and then how we build our roads. One of the pieces that we talk about a fair amount in here is staging and at what levels. So for example, today there are some issues on the road network. I think the province is aware, we're aware, the town's aware. You driving down the street are probably aware that certain intersections do get congested sometimes today. So that's our baseline. And then what we really looked at from there is about 10 years out. So when this is partially developed, we looked at a couple different phases. What does this mean about 10 years out? What do we have to do to make sure things work reasonably well in 10 years? And then further, we took another 10 years out, which is these days is a bit of a speculation between autonomous driving cars, and we're going to have drones flying around. We're going to have all kinds of ways that we're going to transport ourselves in the future. But again, we want to get a sense of where we're going. So we looked at about a 20-year time horizon to understand what's going on. A quick run through the findings. The Trans-Canada Highway and the Stratford Road intersection is probably the most well-known. Everybody knows that that's busy. There's a lot of people making right and left turns. That can back up. It doesn't all the time. So that, what we see is from a modeling perspective, it's congested. There's some delays, but it's not really, really bad. But it's, in the study, we basically say, we really got to monitor that closely, and we have to start making plans to start doing something there. We identify a few things in our study that help the intersection significantly. I know the province is already looking at sort of bigger picture pieces there as well of how to improve operations in those areas. So the new roundabout, as Rob said, has gone in. That was a big piece of the puzzle to make sure certainly vehicles travel down the Trans-Canada Highway, okay, but it becomes a core piece of really servicing these adjacent lands to the Trans-Canada. One of the other big things that we identified here is like Rob, I've been working here for probably 20 years when I first started working in Prince Edward Island. And coming through Stratford, it was always you cross the bridge, you catch a few places, and then it's a highway for a while until you hit, so your speeds were up and there was all kinds of operational things that were going on. So part of developing this little bit more sort of urban core residential area is to kind of transition this piece of Trans-Canada Highway from a real highway feel where I really want to go fast because it looks like I should go fast, to something that feels a little bit more like a town, a little space where I want to spend a bit more time and go a little bit slower. So some of the design features that come out of this start to really help influence the driving habits of people coming in and out of the area. There's a active transport, well, we touched on active transportation and transit. These are such big pieces, especially as we start to densify urban cores like this, to really look at being able to provide an active transportation network that's appealing, usable, safe, and functional for all users. One, internally, just to be able to navigate internally, but also to create bigger connections to the spaces surrounding. From a transit perspective, exactly the same. There's a couple of routes that run through Stratford now. We didn't try to reinvent the transit system here, but certainly identified the fact that we've got a lot more connectivity now. We've got a lot of things that are starting to make more sense in terms of urban structure. So we really should be looking at that transit again as this progresses and moves forward to make it more and more efficient and provide more service to residents of this area. So we identify road hierarchy as an important piece. Sometimes when you have one big road and a couple other big roads, road hierarchy or how things are supposed to connect are not necessarily as clear. Now that we start to make all these interconnection, it becomes a little bit more important to think about what are the main streets that you want to transfer traffic to go in these directions, and which ones don't we want those on? We don't want shortcutting through low-speed residential neighborhoods. So again, we have some ideas in there. That becomes part of the bigger picture as the longer-term planning and development goes through. Traffic, Kinloch becomes, I guess that was one of the other pieces, the sort of the commercial area by the Sobeys and whatnot in Kinloch Road. There's a couple intersections there that start, as you add more and more traffic, that start to deteriorate a little bit. So again, some improvements there, which would be expected out of a development of this size, will be required as time goes on. Not today, not tomorrow, but probably within the next 10 years. Some planning items will have to happen there. The beauty of this is nothing fell apart. Let's put it that way. It's 2,600 people. There's going to be network improvements. The beauty of doing a development of this size, certainly from a transportation perspective as well as a planning, is that you really get to integrate it all together. You really get to paint the big picture with brush. You get to put the whole puzzle together. Too often we run into these studies where we have to deal with this small little piece and you don't have an opportunity to look at the big picture. So again, what we found here is that really everything works. Absolutely there's pieces that need to be improved. Most of those improvements are relatively straightforward in terms of ongoing development of town. The size of this will start to push some of those improvements a little bit quicker, but there's no real major challenges. And then, of course, balancing the multimodal needs here is going to be a big one going on, and that's a lot of discussions and that's a lot of people involved. But everything we've certainly heard from all parties is that's the way everybody wants to see this thing progress. So all of that is very promising. I'm going to leave it at that. I think that gives you sort of a quick overview of the study. Certainly, if there's questions at the end, happy to dive into as deep and as broad as you want to get with transportation impact studies. So appreciate your time on that.
So I'm just going to wrap it up here now, but to reiterate, as part of this plan, the Gray Group had hired Group ATM, their economists, to look at the economic impacts for the town and for the local community. It's really almost $1 billion worth of construction investment over what we think is probably a 20-year plan to build out. It's imagined in 7 phases of construction. And of course, that's going to generate all kinds of different taxes, from new federal government taxes, new provincial taxes, and most importantly, new municipal taxes that can be used for new infrastructure and new services that the town can offer. And just looking at that over the long term, what it's going to generate both in PEI and across Canada. This is a substantial development and a substantial opportunity. So maybe I will hand it back over to Trevor, I guess, to wrap it up. Put you on the spot here.
Sure. Thanks, Rob and Roger. We understand it's a ton of information to be supplying you guys with tonight, and we've had the benefit. We've been working on this for 4 years, and this is a culmination of 4 years of work getting to this point. Back in September of 2001, we revealed our video and our overall plan and invited the public to see it. That's the first blush for input, and we took that input and we considered it, and we went back to Rob and we went back to the town and discussed it, made tweaks to the plan. I'm not really going to take up any more of your time. I think, again, it's a lot of information, but we're super excited about this project. We're, born and raised in the town of Stratford. I've lived in Stratford for over 40 years now, and we intend to stay in Stratford. We're a PEI-based company, and we will continue to be a PEI-based company. And I guess at the end of the day, folks, just, we welcome your comments and your input, and we're not always going to agree on what we do and how we do it, but at the end of the day, I will make the commitment that we will listen to each and every comment. So you'll be heard. So anybody who would like to come up, we're happy to answer some questions.
Thank you very much. Just open some in, please. I'm going to ask you to please come to the mic, ask your question. I want you to identify yourself and your address, and we will direct your question to Trevor or whoever would be able to answer that. And I'd ask everybody else to remain seated until the question's asked, and then the next person can come up. So we do have one here right now. State your name and your address and question.
Hi folks, my name is Greg Tignan of 204 Shakespeare Drive, Unit 305. My daughter lives next door at 198 306. I live there with my wife, now daughter next door. Rezoning lot 882084 to UC would pose a problem for us. I know a lot of the drawings, they show Shakespeare Drive, show a lot next door on the bend, shows us a dirt field, but actually there's 84 condominiums there and 84 residents. If you built a structure 40 meters high, 132 feet, the equivalent of a fixed link across the street from us, we would be literally in the shadow of this huge building. So I'm hoping 84 of us that live there have bought and paid taxes would be considered, to put us in the shadow of the fixed link, literally across the street, boom, there it is, no window underneath. I'm opposed to it. So hopefully you can think about that next time you drive by that bend at the bottom of Shakespeare Drive. That we literally have the fixed link across the street from us. I know it's not the fixed link, but 40 meters, it doesn't seem right.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Yes, yep.
And I know you want to build up, not out, I appreciate it, but I guess it'll directly affect me and my neighbors, so.
Yeah. One of the things, we actually were aware of your comment a couple days ago, so.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, one of the things that we did actually in advance of, because we were anticipating this question.
I know.
So, what he's referring to here, maybe I can take that and I can.
Sorry, yeah.
Go forward. he's referring to these properties right here.
Correct.
And so what we're talking about is this property here, which
I
I'd
think
rather,
you call it Building R.
pardon me?
Building R is the one, yeah, that's right.
Correct,
Crossroads.
yeah. So that is, and I first will say that this is a concept.
Sure.
This is an actual, so each individual building, we will have to go and we'll have to do design and we'll have to do stormwater management and layouts and setbacks and everything like that. But one of the things even in our concept here, that is a lower building right there that would be next to these. And what you're actually looking at here is a shadow study. So we've done a shadow study based on June 21st and December 21st, which is the shortest day of the year, which would have the most impact from a shadow standpoint. And I know it's kind of difficult to see here, but the dark blue areas, these are the hours of shade.
Right.
And then as you can see, those areas do not extend to this property.
So I guess what I'll say, Trevor, is if you think about that, you know, right now when I look out my window, I see a tree lot, which I know will not stay there forever.
Mm-hmm.
But I assumed at some point somebody would build under the existing zone, which would be 3-4 stories. Hey, we all live along, we'll share that sunshine. But if I look across the street, I don't see the Charlottetown Harbor anymore. You know, I don't see trees, I have no control of that. But I'd like to be able to see the setting sun or the afternoon sun. And I appreciate that shading. I feel that if you go 40 meters, those shadows can be a little taller. Just gotta say it. So, you know, like I said, and it's just not me. There's 84 of us live there, been there for 5 years. A lot of the drawings show us as a dirt lot. We're not a dirt lot, been there a long time. And hoping there'll be some consideration to, I guess, the neighbors. You know, if you're gonna build next door to them, please keep us in mind. I guess that's all I'm hoping for, Trevor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
All right, folks.
Good, thanks for your question.
Good evening. I'm Florence Potter, 63 Glen Stewart Drive. First of all, it's unfortunate that there are no women on your illustrious group, because I'm a homeowner, I'm a woman. I know there's a lot of women who have diplomas and degrees who do this work, so it would have been nice, maybe in future. So my question is, you have in your plans 6, 8, 10-story buildings. Have you done any testing for the land? When I worked in England, we had to do testing when we wanted to put a building up to see if the pressure could be taken, if the load could be taken. 12 stories is huge, and PEI is not the best land for buildings, I believe.
Mhm.
I could be wrong. I'm an architect. My next question is, are the apartments going to be staggered apartments? And do you know what I mean by staggered?
No, I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay. If you watch a video called Soft City, Building Density for Everyday Life, and it's by David Smith, I can give you a copy.
I'd love to see it.
Have the link. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than just having square building after square building after square building, you know? It allows for more human interaction, and it would be a better plan than just a tall building.
Yeah, and I think to Rob's point, and I agree with you, and that's what, where we're moving towards form-based code, that's what that accomplishes. It requires that type of thing. It requires setback. It's not just a square building. It will have varying elevations. It will have varying setbacks. And so, yes, it wouldn't be just a tall, 10, 12-story building. And to answer your question with respect to, whether the soil can handle that capacity, regardless of what you do as a developer, you always have to do a geotechnical report. And if that is required, then you have to make that structurally significant to handle that development.
Yeah, I work for those companies in England, so
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, so for sure, yeah.
Also, okay, I'm short, I'm sorry.
just so
yes.
people online
Really should bring a step with me. I live on Glen Stewart Drive, across from the school. Yeah, you know, when you're having coffee, it'd be great to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy. The school, it looks like you're building something next to the school, but it's not clear what it is. And we are looking at the land and we're going, how the heck are they gonna put a building on this?
No, it's not, and actually, what there are on the concept plan, and I will reiterate, this is a concept plan.
Yeah.
There will be some things that are subject to change. What this will do is give us the certainty in zoning that we can go out and do that further investigation. So it's not like we're saying, that's what that building is going to look like, this is what that building, so, but right there on that plan, they're shown as townhouses.
So who can we speak to personally,
Mm-hmm.
not at a meeting like this, but person to person, about these plans? I mean, it will affect us greatly. I mean, who's in charge of this, in other words, you know? Is it the town? Is it Grey Group? Is it, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, and to be quite honest, like, that lot right there, as it stands now, permits that use. That doesn't have to be rezoned for that use at this point.
I'm not talking about rezoning, I'm talking about,
Yeah,
you know, cars. I live across the school, and I put my life at risk every time I want to cross that road when the children are going to school or coming home, and it's the parents. Drive like maniacs. So, I know I have gray hair, and I'm not young, but I plan on being here for many, many years. My family will live beyond 100, so get ready, folks. The pedestrian crossings are dangerous. I have my dog at walk. I'm at the pedestrian crossing, and I'm going like this to drivers, and they're going, as they drive right through. So, it may be funny, but when I get knocked down, it won't be funny. So, would we have flashing lights, flags, something?
yeah, I mean, and that really is beyond our scope as a developer. Well, in this case, the province owns the roads infrastructure, so, and maybe Stephen, you want to comment on that, or?
Because you're putting 2,000 plus places, so.
Yep, and that's exactly why we've had Roger do our traffic study, and maybe he can address some. People smarter than I are going to be figuring this stuff out, for sure.
Thank you. I have other questions, but probably other people will have those.
Well, thank you very much, and we will definitely take a look at that video.
Yeah, good, and let me know how much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Hi.
Richard Hammonds. I live at 266 Shakespeare Drive, and it looks like I'm in the shadow zone. I'd like to know,
Is he okay?
Shakespeare Drive is extremely busy right now with no regard to speed.
Excuse me, could you move your mic just up a little? They're not picking it up on the live stream there. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
All right. Thank God there's no children on our street. I'm damn sure somebody's going to get killed. Will that street be modified with sidewalks to, I mean, the way I look at your concept there, it looks like across the street from us is going to be a 4-story and then something sunk back with another 2 stories, which I'm assuming I should get prepared for 6 stories directly across from me and 12 stories to my left where the roundabout comes in and joins up the Shakespeare. Am I correct?
Well, if you look at this, so essentially what we're doing, and then if you notice on the new roundabout that was constructed on the highway, there is a stub out that will connect directly to where the entrance is to Town Hall. So a lot of that traffic will be directly out to the highway on that new road, as opposed to traveling up and down Shakespeare like they do now. And that's part of what our commitment was to some of the existing infrastructure in Stratford being dead-ended. We're creating dead ends so that traffic doesn't have to travel within neighborhoods now. It will have direct access to the highway. And Roger, you can probably answer that better than I.
So there's a tremendous amount of traffic that comes down Duck's Landing, turns left on the Shakespeare and goes out and around out to the intersection now.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm assuming if you're putting in, I don't know how many people are involved in the structures that you're planning to put directly opposite, across the street from me. And obviously traffic is going to increase. Are you going to do something to Shakespeare to make it more, I don't know, traffic friendly or slow it down.
which is that's a great phrase for it. And it kind of comes to me, the comment on crosswalks as well. Like, I think when we look, so there's a couple of levels to look at this. One is there's a big picture, 2,600 units. There's a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of roads that have to go in, and so on and so on. And that's, it's hard to talk about those minute things when you talk about that big level. You want to make sure that people can generally get in and get out and do the things that they need to do to service these areas. From a practical implementation perspective, both of you are hitting on some really key things that need to happen. If it's a crosswalk that's dangerous right now, where, like you say, you're waving and people are waving back at you, well, there's probably an education piece that has to happen here, not related to this. It happens many places. But in similar ways, like the whole idea of, you may have heard the phrase before, people don't pay attention to signs, right? You can post a speed limit as much as you want, but people won't pay a iota to it. But if you actually paint the lines in a little bit narrow and you design a street in an appropriate way where people kind of feel like they're a little bit, they'll drive based on that feeling and how it works. So part of the things that the beautiful thing about doing a development like this is to support the level of development and what's happening here is the developer, from a traffic safety perspective, the town, we want people traveling on those streets like they should be traveling in an area that has kids and neighborhoods and all that. I can name 1,000 spots across PEI. For sure. Yeah. So I guess my key point, I think, on those things are, as you go through and this actually becomes designed and implemented, there's a lot of attention paid to how you design the street, how wide is it, where are the sidewalks, what do the crosswalks look like, are there signals or is there a roundabout, and how do you deal with active transportation and cars and whatnot. Part of our discussion before about even the roundabout on the Trans-Canada Highway, that starts because as I come through Stratford Road now, and not too far ahead of me, I have a roundabout, so now I don't do 90 kilometers anymore, I do 70 down the street because we've changed the environment that we're driving in. So again, that's the next level down of sort of general road design and transportation system design that I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm sure everybody is very much invested in creating roads that are going to cause people to drive the same way. Where you look at something like Sherwood, whether that's part of directly in this development or an associated piece of it, if people are speeding and going 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers over the speed limit, then something has to get done. And I'm sure then, the town's probably looking at that from a shortcutting perspective or a traffic calming perspective.
Specifically then, are you extending Jubilee up such that it's going to take some of the traffic from behind us, coming down Ducks Landing?
Yes,
You are.
I guess in all of these various connections, I would expect that you're gonna see a very big redistribution. Like the last thing that we would wanna see as a transportation engineer is somebody way over there traveling all the way down there to come here to go all the way back there. That's generic, but if we can make the connections where I can just travel a little bit further down and get to the main transportation routes, that's the key. And really the big part of this is when we talked a little bit before about road hierarchy. You want those defined in a way that, residential traffic, I'm not traveling down a straight road for a long distance. So I think what happens is a lot of those things start to really float as this gets further into design, which is why your comments are important to identify these things. So as design goes forward, it gets incorporated into those.
Okay, and specifically, the development of the land directly across from me, how far back from the road will the building be that's going up?
I'm not sure we can really speak
Well,
it's sort of conceptual.
Well, Shakespeare, directly across from us, right here, there's that large open land which you intend to develop. How far into that vacant land is the building going to start? How far set back into that land is it?
You want to maybe go?
So we've got, I believe the minimum setbacks are 1 meter, the maximum setbacks are 6 meters. And what we're purposely doing is bringing the buildings out to the street so that we don't have parking lots, so it doesn't feel like a strip mall. But those are the guiding principles for it. And what that does is it frees up the center, which is kind of right in the middle of that cluster of buildings for an urban park. So we're concentrating the buildings at the street edge to free up land for an urban core.
In behind it?
Yep, yep.
Okay. All right. Then my last question is, what's your obligation with regards to the wetland in behind Petrochem? As far as cleaning it up or?
This one here,
No, the other one,
right there.
Right, yeah, I see you have a pond there. I don't think there's.
Well, it's just blue to just highlight the wetlands, so none of these are ponds.
Stated
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
What's your obligation as far as?
So as we would start to develop these lands, the next stage of detail after kind of the rezoning happens is the stormwater management strategy, which is going to look at this much development, where does stormwater go, how do we manage it, how do we ensure that there's no kind of pre and post changes in runoff. And in some cases, that may mean improvements to wetlands or additional stormwater ponds that are attached to those things. But that's another level of detail that would happen at the design stage.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess I don't oppose to what's going across the street from me, although I was walking the nice view I have now. And I'm obviously in the shadow zone, but I agree with my neighbor about that 12-story building. I'm really opposed to that, with that alternate.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Stay up here, just in case.
Mike Ross, live at 68 Salisbury Crescent, just up the street. I'm particularly interested in the traffic study. I'd love to see it, frankly. It's important in my mind that there's a continuous effort from you folks, the traffic people, as development begins to occur on the ground, that if you're doing proper trip generation, trip distribution patterns, and particularly intersections, and you're right about that are the important elements of an important transportation plan. I understand that your transportation plan was done a couple of years ago. Things have changed a little bit over time. I'd like to, and you said you've done some modeling to get background traffic or future traffic. I'd be interested in having a look at your write-up on the model. I used to be in your business. I think it's important that you do, as you're saying, that as you develop little parcels of land that before they're built, you've already done the future trip generation and assignment. So I'm wondering about, I think you said it's about 2 years old now. Yeah, okay. The Ministry of Transportation and Transportation, I guess, owns that study. I don't know if the town has any access to it. But I'd enjoy having a look at it.
Yep, sure.
That's really, I'm doing actually this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of points. I think one, if I'm not mistaken, the transportation impact study should be publicly available.
Probably available.
Yeah. Oh, I'm pretty sure it is. I'm just not sure exactly the webpage or whatnot, but I suspect it's there.
The transportation study has been shared already on at various council meetings where this file was discussed. There was a link to the actual transportation study on that website, so it is available publicly, yes.
Yeah, okay. Through you?
Yes, if you contact the planning department, we can certainly get you in contact. Yes.
Okay, anyways, I think it's very important to trip assignment from what you're gonna be putting on stream next, and getting the intersections fixed and get them right, get them wider, whether they lengthen for storage space, and, there's a fair bit of work there.
Yeah.
Reassurance that you're gonna actually be doing that, and that we're gonna be built.
Well, yeah, certainly the province and the town don't let us away with very much without kind of making sure, because it's certainly in everybody's best interest. I think the key is, you're right, it's 2 years old. I think May 2020, we caught most of the data before COVID, but as we know, the pandemic's changed things a lot now. We've seen places with traffic go up and go down. So there's a prudent sign into due diligence as this progresses. If things start to come forward that don't make sense with what the study says, which hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, then, there may be a need to redevelop, restudy, look at different situations, so those will be done.
Background traffic estimates.
Yep.
Without the development, you're gonna take into account the institutional, plans, the new school campus and all that kind of thing, and developing background traffic?
For the background traffic projections, yeah, that's, we take existing traffic now through traffic counts and all kinds of and then we would add on all those pieces, sometimes in specific pieces, but sometimes in a little bit broader sense. So we will have a general background traffic growth overall, and then we'll look at certain specific loads.
That's in your
Yep.
reports?
Yeah.
And it's available through you?
That's correct. Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And hopefully, any questions that have access to the Department of Transportation.
Yep, perfect.
Just, it's a big deal.
For sure.
It's gotta be done right. You can't even tackle that. And, you're gonna generate a hell of a lot of new traffic. Period. You can't dispute that. It's gonna be a lot of new traffic on the roads.
And certainly, we all want to make sure it's handled in the appropriate way, for sure, so
It's gonna-
appreciate the
yeah,
comments.
It's gonna be more than $1.98. Keep the road system at pace with your development.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, if we could just ensure, we're having a little trouble with the floor mic, so if we could just ensure that we're as close to it as possible, just so we can pick it up for the people online.
I'm very loud.
Great, thank you.
I'm Sandy Mace, I live at 14 Elroy Drive, and love this plan. Everybody, thanks for putting it together. I'm really excited. I try to tell everyone to move to Stratford, so thank you for helping us with that. I'm very excited for the future. My comment has to do with the school. I'm one of those crazy parents, but I don't drive, I walk everywhere. And that road where the schools are, Glen Stewart Drive, is probably one of the most dangerous roads in Stratford. And I know this doesn't have to do directly with the Grey Group, a little bit more public transportation. Would love a comment though on studying having sidewalks on both sides of that road, so you can actually put crosswalks in and landings on multiple places throughout that road. Parking is already lacking. Public School Board did not do a good job trying to plan their parking for Stratford Elementary School, so there's already people sprawled everywhere. You guys know this. On the grass, mud, like everywhere, hitting people, walking dogs, like literally it's very dangerous. So I'd love just a comment from whoever the right person is, that when you're looking at that, 2, it's somewhere on a bullet point, because I haven't seen it tonight, and 3, there's a plan to be able to make it safer for the residents, the children, and for anyone who's biking, walking, cycling, or driving by. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, I mean, I have to be a little careful in speaking for my side as a consultant coming in, working on the development specifically. Certainly from a transportation safety perspective, absolutely. I mean, to me, regardless of this development or the next one or something else going on, if there are road issues or there's safety issues on a road network, regardless of the cause, then it absolutely should be brought forward from the public. The town and province have certain responsibilities to look at those things where they are potential safety issues. So as you work through these types of larger developments, it all works in concert, right? This is a development, as the gentleman said, it's going to generate a lot, so we want to make sure certainly the roads within the development, but everything that's really impacted by the development operates as best we possibly can. So, you know, we certainly have recommendations as we go through these. Those might go to the province or go to the town as recommendations, but this transportation systems don't work in isolation, right? They need everybody buying into it and everybody agreeing. So it starts, if you see a situation just like you just did, you see a situation that's not great, bring it up, and then there's generally processes to go through to try and solve those problems, implement things that make things better for everybody.
Hi, my name is David Closer. I live at 272 Stratford Road. First of all, I am one of the duplexes that is going to be in the shadows of that development on Shakespeare. I do not agree with it. That's not why I moved to Stratford. That's not why I bought the property that I bought. It was to be overshadowed by 2 or 3 12-story buildings plus others. I have a great issue with that. My home is my retirement investment. That development starts there, my property value is going down. Nobody's going to want to buy that place across from buildings like that. That's my concern. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
I'll just add that, I mean, one of the outcomes of a large master plan project like this is that property values tend to increase. And, you know, it's just the nature of urban development. Lands around large urban parks or around areas with density tend to increase in value, but point taken.
You ask it, yeah.
Yep.
Just come to the mic, yeah, just come to the mic. Yeah.
You say the project's going to be 10, 15 years?
But 20 years is what they anticipate to build out, yeah.
So 5 years from now, I try to sell my property, and even any possible buyers are going to see development across the road from me. First of all, you've got all that construction going on. You don't know how long it's going to be, right? We just dealt with the traffic circle being built. We couldn't sit outside our home all summer.
Mm. Yeah.
So with all this construction going on, myself, my neighbors are all going to go through the same thing again. Where's the enjoyment in life? I mean, I realize development has to happen. Like, I'm not against development. I'm just against going so high.
Yep.
And so big. It's a Stratford, we moved here because it's a community, not a city. If we wanted to live in the city, we'd live in Charlotte. Or move to Toronto. That's not what we came here for.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have a question, Kev?
Yeah, we do have a question that came in online from Lauren Vale, 204 Shakespeare Drive. Is there a demand for more commercial space / urban core in Stratford? Commercial spaces have been developed in recent years and are still mostly vacant.
Is there a demand? So yes, there is a demand, and population drives demand. As we grow our population, there is a demand for more commercial space. Now, one of the things that we did do is, as part of our process, we hired Turner Drake. One of the things that we did do was we hired Turner Drake and Associates, who are they do property appraisals, they do market analysis. We had them look at what the existing supply of commercial space was in Stratford and what the demand would be for commercial space as the community grew. So really, what they basically, I'm not going to bore you with all the details and specifics on how much of space and what type of space. But at the end of the day, we are tasked with, from the town of Stratford too, with providing a certain amount of commercial space for an urban core. And one of their fears is once that's developed for residential purposes, the lack of commercial space will be a deterrent because as you grow your population, you need those services. You need healthcare, you need banks, you need dry cleaners, you need all those types of services. And they want to make sure, and we want to make sure, and we're a commercial developer by nature, we want to make sure that the options are there. We don't believe in if you build it, they will come. If the demand is there, we will build it. So, but yes, to answer your question, there is a demand for commercial space.
Thank you. Any more questions? Come to the, oh, there we go.
Hi, JP Masson, 35 Windsor Drive, Apartment 12. My concerns are mainly environmental in nature. If you look at the rezoning map, most of the places that are planned for development are currently forested areas, and the plan is basically going to get rid of essentially every forested area in that general area. So I'm just a little, well, not happy about that, I suppose, but
So if we're talking about environmental impact, that is one of our primary reasons behind developing up. So we've done some numbers and chased some numbers. So by doing this, and we are going to lose trees in the core, there's no question. We are saving as many trees as we possibly can as part of our development. And in fact, we did a development called Kelly Heights there, where we had full approvals to build that subdivision. After the fact, after we had our approvals, it was identified that there was an old growth stand within our development. We rejigged our development plan to save those trees. In this case, we're doing 2,600 residential units, in excess of 2,600 residential units, and 300,000 square feet in approximately 100 acres, while maintaining the current wetland areas. For instance, if we had to do that same amount of development, those 2,600 residential units, so the 22.7 kilometers worth of new roads that we would have to build, the actual area of just the roadways for that would be almost 113 acres, 112.8 acres. The minimum lot size for a single-family home in Stratford right now is 0.17 of an acre. To build 2,660 residential units, that's 452 acres. Add on to that your stormwater management, which would equate to about 5% of that development in single-family homes. That's another 25 acres. And then your 10% green space dedication. So that development of 2,660 single-family homes would require 650 acres to develop. By doing a downtown core, increasing your density, we're doing that same amount of development and more in 100 acres. We're saving almost 600 acres of farmland, of green space, of forest within the town of Stratford and accomplishing the same amount of development. So if you look at our development in a silo, yes, we're going to lose trees. But the effect of all the trees and the green space and the farmland that we're not going to lose is uncalculable.
I mean, you could just not do the development at all. That would save even more.
True, yeah, but the need is there. We know very much that there's a growth strategy for PEI in terms of growing your communities, growing an immigration strategy that we need to grow in order to maintain facilities and to maintain tax structures and to maintain our growth. We need to accommodate those people somewhere. So would we be better off doing it in another location? It has to happen. We're saying that this is probably the best option for that. In 2021, there was a shortfall of 700 housing units on PEI. In 2022, it's approximately 800. We're 1,500 houses short in just 2 years. In just 2 years. And we have a growth strategy for immigration. with the hopes that we're going to get our population to 200,000 in the next 20 years, they need to be housed. Somebody has to house them, and we feel that this is the lowest impact way to do that.
Well, okay, for the people already living here, being able to get out into nature and stuff is really good for stress, anxiety, all that.
Absolutely.
And also, living in a higher density area also increases stress and anxiety typically. Not to mention that being in a higher density area is also going to increase like property values and thus property rents and stuff, which is going to put a lot of financial strain on current residents, I would imagine. Rent, property taxes, that sort of thing.
And as Rob mentioned, typically with that development, property values increase. And as you increase your density, the cost of development per unit comes down. So it actually has an effect to lower rent as we increase that supply.
Okay, I thought studies online said the opposite of that, but okay. Also, one question about traffic.
Sure.
Since everyone's talking about traffic.
Yeah, Roger, who's the traffic guru. Thank you for your question, sir.
So, when there's construction going on the Hillsborough Bridge, which is rather frequently actually, but once a year it seems like recently, for a few weeks or months or whatever, that causes a lot of gridlock around here. Like, traffic can be backed up on the Trans-Canada down past the town hall, I think, or even further. I'm not sure. So adding all those new residences is likely going to greatly increase that. The Hillsborough Bridge will still be acting like a bottleneck during construction times.
Yeah, I mean, I think construction's one issue, and valid, totally valid. Day-to-day operations, when there's not construction, which is hopefully most of the time, but structures need maintenance and there's things that have to happen. So often, and I mean, I can't speak specifically for how the Hillsborough Bridge, but I would assume it's a heavy transportation peak that there would be typically consideration for trying to do most of the work off peak hours. There's probably some stuff you can't. So I think the construction side is one thing. I think as you start getting into development of larger developments like this, you take some care in managing your construction activities to minimize impact to traffic. It's not to say that it's never going to be there, but you do try and minimize that. And the town and the province usually has certain restrictions on what you can and can't do in terms of developing. As far as the day-to-day stuff, I think that's sort of the crux of what we try and address in the transportation impact study and what the province tries to address. And typically when you look at a structure like the Hillsborough Bridge, usually the bridge itself is fine. It usually has adequate capacity. It's almost always the intersections on the ends of it that cause the challenges. I can drive, if it was just a highway on one end, a highway on the other end, I could just drive across the bridge and I'd go, but then you hit signals at the other side, and if you have multiple conflicting movements, then all of a sudden you get stuck at the intersection. So a lot of the work, like we talked in our report, and I know the province is working on some stuff, when you look at the Stratford Trans-Canada Highway, it has some capacity issues with left turns, right turns, and some pretty big volumes. And absolutely, some work has to be done there as traffic grows. But it's really the intersection itself that's the bottleneck in terms of capacity as opposed to the bridge itself. So as intersections get improved, generally your network gets improved. And I think an important piece of that too is, when we do our modeling and when the province does their work, is you don't want to go fix this one thing and then have this one break. So most studies then will look at and say, well, if we're going to fix this, how does that impact the next intersections down and roadways down the street? So that would be a typical process that would be followed through on this. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. And one last thing, since this is such a big project that greatly affects everyone in Stratford basically, I personally think that the residents themselves should be able to vote on whether or not to go forward with it.
which would be, I mean, I think this is that's not necessarily my world of expertise, so somebody throw something if I go off base here, but, you know, this is really a starting position as Terry said, you know, it's conceptual plan, here's what we're thinking, here's how things are going, and the ability to come out to a meeting like this and provide public feedback of concerns and issues and questions that you have is to me, one of the most important things as part of this process. So suffice to say, I suspect there's going to be all kinds of opportunity to provide feedback as this moves forward, starting certainly with tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Would you pull the mic down so you'll speak into it? Yeah, okay.
So sorry. Okay. First of all, I just want to say, I've only lived in PEI for 7 years. Scotland, England, Montreal, Ottawa, you name it. When I heard of this, I was told that the Green family are a very ethical family and who are very well respected in the community. So I felt good in knowing that, because for me, business is business. You got to make money. You
That's
know?
right. Yeah.
But if you have a plan and you're willing to meet with people and you accept some of their criticism, they're not criticism, they're just different opinions. To me, it goes a long way. But I would like more. I read all of this, and some of it I didn't quite get. Okay. Are any of these housing units going to be for rent, or are they all to be sold?
Yes, there will be a substantial amount of them being available for rent. We'll be as we get further down into our development plan, we'll be looking at particular zones and particular areas and kind of determining what the market looks like with respect to, is there an appetite for people to purchase condos? But you know, at the end of the day, we want to build a community, and again, we live in this community. We want to build a community where a young family can afford to move in, where as they grow, they have a home that they can live in. As they become empty nesters, they can stay in their community and downsize. You know, like I say, I've lived here for 40 years. I have an 80-year-old mother that is now in an empty home who needs to downsize, wants to stay in her community. I'm going to be an empty nester in the next few years, and I'll be looking to downsize. I have a concern that my children will not be able to live in this community because they will not be able to afford to live in this community. If we continue to build single-family homes, it's not going to be affordable. The average home sale price in Stratford in April of 2021 was $574,000 and sold in 16 days. That is not an affordable community. If we're going to have a vibrant community, we have to be able to attract those young families who live and shop and work in our community rather than drive to Charlottetown.
Not just young families, older people too.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, like I want my mother to be able to stay in this community, right? And you know, the options are very limited now.
I know it's not the Gray family's responsibility, but they have an opportunity to help your neighbor, you know.
Absolutely.
When I see the news and I see people living in tents in November, it makes me cry, because I have a 2-bedroom apartment, and I wish I could offer my room to somebody, you know, but I've been advised to be careful on that. But you know what I mean, is if you're building, perhaps it could be like the Arsenal people who have built smaller apartments to rent, and maybe this is something the family could think of.
That's exactly our strategy. We want to build units for every socioeconomic level, for every income level, for every stage of life. And that's what makes a vibrant community. That's what makes a community thrive. And that's really what our goal here is. To be quite honest, like, this plan and this land, it's not if it's going to be developed or not. The land will be developed. It's just whether we have an overall picture determining how we're going to do that. It's easy to sell a chunk of land and put a building up and sell another chunk of land. But we feel that Stratford deserves more than that. And we only have one chance to do it. And that's really what we're doing. We're taking that long-term approach. We're taking a 20-year approach. This is a legacy project. Corey's family lives here. My family lives here. We have to see these people walking down the road every day. We want to be proud of this community, and our money will stay in this community. This is really what we live for.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to the Gray family for having this meeting. They didn't have to really, because they own the land, they saved up and bought it. So I'm very grateful to be able to put my 2 cents in. And on that note, will there be more meetings like this as this project goes further?
Yeah, this is the initial meeting. We did last year do 2 meetings, public meetings, that weren't required. We just wanted to provide the information and get feedback on that. Subsequent to that, this is really the first step in having that rezoning and developing what this will look like going forward. Each property, each building will still have to have a development agreement. It will still have to have, with the new zones, we'll still have to get building permits. So it's not just a by default, we can go and build whatever we want if these new zones come into place. Everything is still subject to approval from a stormwater management standpoint, from parking ratios, from you know, we're dealing with, we want this to be a next generation development where we're working with Maritime Electric on potential pilot projects for energy generation and storage. Potentially green roofs, on-site water storage, so we can lessen the economic impact, environmental impact. We've had meetings with Aspen Kempton Associates wondering, okay, what is the most efficient way to do this? We want to be environmentally sensitive, economically feasible, and because those savings, for instance, again, if we build 2.9 kilometers worth of roadways, in rough terms, the infrastructure cost to put in a road and water and sewer is about $2,500 per meter. Am I right, Jody? Yeah, it's going up. But the cost to do that 2.9 kilometers is $7.25 million.
You know that if you reduce the width of the road every so often, you reduce the speed of people going crazy?
We don't have control over that. That's actually dictated to us by the province and the town.
Province.
But for instance, if we had to build that 22.7 kilometers worth of roads, the cost of the infrastructure for that is over $56 million. That $49 million that we're not spending on road work and infrastructure costs, and it is borne by the developer, that $50 million, guess what? That goes into the buildings. And that's an offset cost that will allow us to provide that property in a more economical way.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for
Thank you.
allowing me to put my 2 cents in. Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
question.
We have a question there, Kevin.
Yep, one more question online. This question comes from Vince Lavers, who lives at 33 Marion Drive. My concern regards bylaw number 45, page 61, section 7.15.2, authority to deny permits. See points B, C, D, and E. In early September 2021, we saw a record amount of rainfall which caused significant flooding on Marion Drive. The storm sewer beside my home belongs to the province and was simply overwhelmed. I spoke with one of the provincial engineers and was told there was no blockage found. The sewer simply could not handle this much rain. All of the ditches and berms overflowed, water covered the road, and flooded my yard. I submitted flooding photos to my councillors and to the planning department. There is simply no capacity for more rain. I do not support the rezoning of a small part of PID 328039, specifically the strip of land between Purley Drive and the Stratford Elementary, because of this. There have been no changes to the sewer since this event. As the Grey Group development moves forward, non-permeable surfaces, parking lots, buildings, etc., will create additional runoff for this sewer. With climate change, I expect hurricane and tropical storms moving further north, which will also cause more rain. What is the plan for this?
That's a big question. There's a lot to that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, as we build, there's going to be some more hard surfaces there. But again, part of building up allows us to maintain more green space. And again, we're working with engineers and consultants with respect to what storage we can make on our site rather than run that water off, whether it's to do irrigation for our landscaping, By putting underground parking in, we're lessening the amount of hardscapes that we have to put in. One thing that we do want to look at, and that would have to be in conjunction with the town of Stratford, is it's dictated to us, the parking ratios, whether we have to provide 1, 2, or 3 parking spots per unit. For instance, if you're building a mall, the requirement right now is that you have to provide 1 parking spot per 200 square feet of developed space. So to put that in perspective, if you build a 100,000 square foot property, you have to provide 500 parking spaces. And we feel that with the density that we can get, or that we're hoping to get in Stratford, the walkability of that, and if you can bike to your store rather than getting into your car, that should lessen the amount of surface parking that you need. And I think that's a strategy. Some of these parking ratios were determined 20 years ago when active transportation and density wasn't even a consideration. That will lessen that. And you know what, to be quite honest, the planning department, or there are restrictions in place on how much you can actually flow water and the rate at which you can flow that water off your site. So it will require more on-site storage so that it lessens the flow rate while you're doing that. So again, that's an engineering question. I'm a layman when it comes to that type of thing. I'll leave that to the engineers to figure that out, how that will work in detail. But yeah, Roger.
Pretty good for a layman. It's and now I can put it on the spot on that. It's great. I mean, great question. Again, I think that those are the really important things that come out of meetings like this. I had a problem in my yard, so be careful when you're doing things like this. I think everybody, certainly on an engineering side and technical side and planning side right now, are not worried, are aware of a couple of key things. One, sea level rise, climate change. And all the things that are coming and stemming from that. It's very much a changing world. When we used to use the term, it's a 1 in a 100-year storm, which you seem to get every 3 years now. So statistically, things don't really work out that well. So it's an important piece of the puzzle. The province, the town, really everywhere I work will come back. Your starting spot is whatever's flowing off that site right now shall not increase. So you do whatever development you want. You put on one massive asphalt parking lot. You still have to do something to manage that stormwater, and that's just a requirement. The province, they will not let this thing go any further unless we can show that that's going to be at least balanced, if not. And so, you know, when we're aware of things that are happening in the nearby, so if this is an occasion where whether it was a blockage or not, or something happened, that's notable. And as the system gets designed, then things like that get taken into account. The traditional way to this is put a bunch of pipes in the ground and move it along. Today's methods become, I would say, much more green. So we try and do much more on-site on individual lots. So as opposed to trying to manage it in one big storm retention pond, you manage it in 50 or 60 different little spots throughout on building rooftops. There's all kinds of really, really cool, innovative ways to manage stormwater these days. And like you say, if you free up some money from having to do this massive development, spend all your money on asphalt roads, you can start to invest in a little bit more green infrastructure that creates much, much more vibrant communities. So fair point, needs to be taken into account. Again, as we get into detailed design, things like that get considered in much more detail. So appreciate those types of comments.
Okay, here we go. And speak right into the mic. There you go. Your name and address.
Mark Masson, 13 Holland Drive. Just want some clarification. When you're talking about this development plan, you said the idea is growing up, you don't grow out, so you can save on the infrastructure. That, to me, gives the implication that there will be no other developments going out, which I don't think is right, right? We will still be developing out. We will still be creating new areas, new zones within Stratford. So that argument of, yeah, you're saving those resources, to me is not an argument, because there will still be development. And communities past Stratford will also be developing. So when you're saying that, I don't like the look of the buildings. I moved to Stratford 20 plus years ago because of the trees, because of the environment, because it was a more relaxed area. Had my family here, and they all plan, to me, it makes me look like downtown Halifax or something like that, which is what I don't want. I like what we have, I like the trees, I like the environment. So, again, I'm just looking for some clarification. This plan will not stop further development, right? We will still be developing other areas, so we'll still be developing that infrastructure.
Maybe to back up a little bit on that, I mean, and as the statistics showed, the town of Stratford is growing. It has been growing for the last 20 years. A number of those years, it was the fastest growing community in Eastern Canada. So yes, the community will continue to grow. Yes, the community will continue to grow outside of the core area. I think what the developer is trying to emphasize here is they have an opportunity to potentially do more dense development in a future downtown for the town. So they're trying to just state, if we were to sprawl this development out, they're trying to emphasize how much land, how much road it would take. So yes, this will not stop development outside of the core area, but does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my other concern is really the traffic. You've done the traffic studies, but you're looking at adding close to 3,000 new residential areas or homes within this area. There's already traffic. Anybody coming home from Charlottetown, or, you know, we're stuck to rotaries down past the bypass. We already have that traffic problem, and we already have the infrastructure problem. We just got the sewers moved over, which is great, but, you know, I figure in another 10 years, we're gonna have to look at this again and look at upgrading whatever we have. So that's my big concern, is that we're putting that much in the core where we can't add any more roads in this area. You know, unless they decide to add another 2 lanes to the bridge, we're stuck with what we have. I don't know, I see that we're adding too much in a dense area. For me, it's the traffic, and I much prefer to have the trees. I don't like the look of the buildings personally. The 2-story homes is fine because it's more of a home type of system. But those big buildings by the road, to me, like I said, just makes me think of downtown Halifax or downtown Charlottetown. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Melanie McCarthy. I live on the Keppick Road, and my address was given to those ladies back there, and for work purposes, I'm not going to say it. Okay? I just wanted to, I was looking at your pictorial, and I appreciated your video at the beginning Mr. Gray showed, and I like that he reflected back on moving here because it is rural, and he showed the photos of walking on the trails with the large mature trees, which was lovely, and I appreciate that. I do know the pictorial shows 2 areas that are forested, and the one near the Shoppers Plaza is pretty well gone now, as is the one behind the Tim Hortons, because the other plaza was also built there. So this image kind of is a false pictorial for the amount of forested area that's there at the moment. The other hardwood forest that Stratford will lose is in, I think, between phase 2 and phase 6, where you had TUV, WX, YZ. I hope that you had said when you're doing your development, you'll do your best to save some of those, because none of us in our lifetime are going to see those trees again if you cut them down. So, and most of us probably have children or grandchildren, so that's just something to think about. My other thing I'm wondering is, have you ever reached out to any of the provincial's nature groups for their input, as we have a lot of provincial specialists with regard to habitat and...
Yes, we've actually had meetings with the Provincial Department of Environment. We've also attended just recently and been involved with the SAWIG, with the town of Stratford, the Stratford Area Watershed Improvement Group. So we've made a commitment to them that, yes, we will work with them on best practice, you know, species identification, to make sure that if there's trees removed, that well, when there's trees removed. So there will be trees removed, but regardless of whether it's this development or if it's not rezoned, those trees are going to be removed. You'll just get less bang for your buck from a development standpoint. But we would be making sure that we work with them in terms of replanting native species, eliminating invasive species that are non-native, and working with them and getting their expertise with respect to improving what remains and what we replace with the proper species.
I'd appreciate in the future if you ever show your pictorials that you identify the people who may not be aware of that those large forested spots are pretty well gone.
Yeah, unfortunately, those properties don't belong to us, and when we did our plan, they were full, mature properties, yeah.
It does look like it's part of yours, but
Yeah.
if you're not paying attention, it just is a false presence.
Thank you, I appreciate that comment.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you. Any more questions? Here we go.
My name is Joe Ives. I live on 25 Creekside Drive. Just a comment. I'm in the real estate business, so I might be seen as very biased on this, but I've seen hundreds of survey plans, programs of people developing. I've been to a lot of public meetings where people have been opposed to pretty much every subdivision in Stratford, by the way, and all the concerns are very valid. I have to say that this plan, I've seen it a few times, is probably one of the most impressive plans I've seen on engineering, traffic studies, and the whole density issue. So, kudos to that. And I know a lot of people come up to me a lot of times saying that how are my kids ever going to afford to live in Stratford? Unless we get density, your children are not going to be able to afford the house you live in now. And when people say we have to make it affordable, that means our property values have to go down. None of us want that. So unless we find a solution to get more properties and places for people to live, whether that's rental, condo, or single family, we have to get more density. People did not want 75-foot front roads on Millennium Drive when it first came out, because they didn't match the 100 and 150 on John Hamilton. People didn't want 45-foot lots. People did not want semi-detached. People did not want those things. Change is very difficult for all of us. But like I said, I've seen all kinds of these, and I understand if it was right across the street from me, I'm going to have concerns. I've never seen a shadow study. So for what it's worth, it's a very impressive plan. I hope the zoning does go through and those changes, and I hope Stratford becomes the town that it wants to be, because that's the statement. To imagine that, I think it's there. So congratulations, and I hope it does go forward.
Thank you. You scared them away. You scared them away.
Go easy on me, Vi.
My name is Viola Evans-Murley, and I live on 24 Ponside Court. I've been living in Southport, Stratford, for 56 years. The town has been growing and growing and growing, and it is now busting at the seams. I want to congratulate the Corey Gray Group. I think they've done a fantastic job, and they're open not only to do their own homework, but to come and to consult with the residents, take feedback, and to respect. And I totally honor you for doing that. I really do. It's a wonderful project, and we need it. Because I think there's going to be less traffic on the Hillsborough Bridge, because you know what? Southport will become a town which will be self-sufficient, and it will be growing and having its own businesses and the commercial businesses, and people will be here and they won't have to travel over town. It's wonderful. I certainly back up every comment that Joe Ives said. In fact, our boys went to school with these lads, and it's just exciting to see that. It's absolutely wonderful. And there will be changes. And I think, you know what the young gentleman said here, is that, you know what, if it's a project that's so worthwhile for the town, and it comes to the point where we have to vote on it, so be it. You know what? The Gray family has been a long-standing family of ethical values, and they've always respected their neighbors, themselves, and you know what? They will do right by the whole project in the town. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Violet. Any more questions? Going once. Nothing online. Okay, if there's no more questions, I want to thank Corey and your team for an excellent presentation here tonight, and I'm sure everybody here in the room has a better idea of what's coming down the road, and it's very exciting. I want to thank all the questions tonight from the residents. They're all great questions, and we ask ourselves, what is the next step? Well, written comments will be received until Wednesday, November 30th, 2022 at 12 noon. So if you want to put your questions or comments to paper, you can submit that, but it has to be in by November 30th. After that, all your comments, everything tonight is being recorded and will be transcribed and presented to the planning board for discussion and recommendations to council on January 3rd, 2023. And then after that, a recommendation will go to council, town council meeting for decision on January 11th, 2023. So that will be the next steps forward. So once again, I want to thank everybody here for coming out tonight. It's great to see a full house here and great questions and great presentations. And so thank you and have a beautiful evening. Safe drive home.
Thanks, everyone.